Mark Reynolds had always been a charming and ambitious young man. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, he watched his mother, Lisa, work tirelessly to provide for them after his father's untimely death. She juggled multiple jobs, waitressing by day and working as a night nurse. Despite the constant grind, Lisa always had a smile for Mark, always made sure he knew he was loved. But as Mark grew older, his admiration for his mother turned into resentment. He despised their small, cluttered apartment, the second-hand clothes, and the fact that they couldn't afford even the simplest luxuries his friends took for granted. By the time he was in his mid-20s, Mark was determined to escape his humble beginnings, even if it meant betraying the one person who had always stood by him. Mark fell in with a crowd that valued wealth and status above all else. At the center of this group was Emily, a stunning woman who was drawn to Mark's ambitious spirit. Together, they dreamed of a life of luxury, far removed from the constraints of Mark's current life. Emily had no idea of the lengths Mark would go to achieve his goals, and he did his best to keep it that way. One evening, while Lisa was working a double shift at the hospital, Mark stumbled upon an opportunity that seemed too good to pass up. He found a stash of prescription drugs in her bedroom, left over from an old injury. As he stared at the bottles, a dark plan began to form in his mind. This was his chance to get rid of the obstacle standing between him and the life he craved. Over the next few weeks, Mark meticulously planted the drugs around their apartment in places where they would be easily discovered by the authorities. He was careful, ensuring that nothing would point back to him. Then, he made an anonymous call to the police, tipping them off about Lisa's illegal activities. The night of the raid was a blur of flashing lights and chaos. Lisa was dragged from the apartment in handcuffs, her face a mask of confusion and fear. She couldn't understand how the drugs had ended up in her home, and the evidence against her was overwhelming. Despite her protests of innocence, Lisa was sentenced to 5 years in prison. As the judge read out the sentence, Mark felt a pang of guilt, but he quickly buried it, convincing himself that he had done what was necessary. With Lisa out of the way, Mark sold the apartment and moved in with Emily. They lived it up, spending lavishly and enjoying the freedom that came from his betrayal. They traveled, dined at the finest restaurants, and attended exclusive parties. For a while, it seemed like everything was falling into place. But as the months turned into years, the money he had made from selling the apartment dwindled, and the cracks in his relationship with Emily began to show. Emily was used to a certain lifestyle, and as Mark's funds dried up, so did her patience. They fought constantly, and eventually, she left him for someone with deeper pockets. Alone and broke, Mark's guilt began to gnaw at him, but he pushed it down, refusing to acknowledge the weight of his actions. 3 years into Lisa's sentence, a new lawyer took on her case pro bono. He was convinced that she had been wrongfully accused and began to dig into the evidence. It didn't take long for him to uncover discrepancies and procedural errors that cast doubt on the legitimacy of her conviction. After a lengthy legal battle, Lisa was released on parole. When Mark learned of his mother's release, he was consumed by fear and guilt. He avoided her, unable to face the consequences of his actions. Lisa, now a shadow of her former self, aged beyond her years and filled with a quiet, simmering rage, moved into a small, dingy apartment on the outskirts of town. She took a job as a clerk at a local grocery store, trying to rebuild her life. Then, a few months later, Lisa passed away unexpectedly. The years of stress and heartbreak had taken their toll. Mark, now desperate for money, eagerly anticipated the reading of her will. He was confident that as her only child, he would inherit everything. He arrived at the lawyer's office, dressed in his best suit, trying to mask his anxiety with a veneer of confidence. The lawyer, Mr. Harris, was a stern, no-nonsense man. He looked Mark directly in the eye as he began to read Lisa's will. "To my son, Mark, I leave the sum of $1, Mr. Harris read, his voice steady and unemotional. Mark's heart dropped. "What? There must be some mistake," he stammered, his mind racing. Mr. Harris continued, ignoring Mark's outburst. "The remainder of my estate, including the funds from the sale of our apartment and my savings, I leave to charity. My son, Mark, betrayed me in the worst possible way. This is my final lesson to him. True wealth is found in integrity and love, not in money." Mark sat there, stunned. The room seemed to close in around him as the weight of his actions finally came crashing down. He had framed his own mother, destroyed her life, and for what? In the end, he was left with nothing but a single dollar and a lifetime of regret. As he left the lawyer's office, the reality of his situation hit him. Mark wandered the streets, reflecting on the choices he had made. He realized that his quest for wealth and status had cost him the one thing that truly mattered: his family. He vowed to change, to live a life that honored his mother's memory, but he knew that no amount of redemption could ever undo the pain he had caused. In the end, Mark learned the hard way that betrayal and greed only lead to emptiness. The real riches in life come from the love and trust of those closest to us, a lesson he would carry with him for the rest of his days. Years later, Mark had managed to piece his life back together. He worked as a volunteer at a local homeless shelter, dedicating his time to helping those in need. It was his way of atoning for his past sins, of trying to live up to the values his mother had instilled in him. Though the guilt never fully left him, he found a sense of peace in his new purpose. One cold winter night, while serving dinner at the shelter, Mark met a young woman who reminded him of himself. She was lost, angry, and desperate for a way out of her circumstances. Mark took her under his wing, sharing his story with her, hoping that his mistakes could serve as a warning. Through his work, Mark discovered that redemption is a journey, not a destination. He knew he could never change the past, but he could shape the future. And in doing so, he found a way to honor his mother's memory, proving that even the deepest wounds can begin to heal with time, compassion, and the courage to face the truth. Thank you so much for watching this video. I put a link down below about something very interesting you'll like. Go check that out. Subscribe for more daily content. See you on the next one.